Oh, hello, everybody.
Oh,
Just
go ahead,
a
Matt.
little bit about my effective website, I guess, then. It's all open source code up on GitHub there. And it's just kind of like the actual base application I maintain. So I do like a whole bunch of client work. I probably spin up a new Rails app like, I don't know, 3 or 4 times a year anyway.
Right.
So 3 or 4 times a year, I'll come back to the site. I'll run all the bundle updates and I'll update everything and just kind of keep it as a good starting point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So then today we're gonna try to Dockerize it, and it'll be a little bit easier for other people to use, and maybe I'll start using Docker in my tool set more.
Yeah, and today we'll just focus on setting up a development environment for Docker. We won't
Right.
touch on production or anything like that. So we'll skip some of those steps. So if we can get the development environment working, maybe in a future, I don't know, this recording or meetup or something, we'll try and get it ready for production.
Okay, sounds good.
So, all right, Matt, why don't you try sharing your screen there?
Yeah. Okay. I probably just want to share my one application rather than everything here. I think that's working.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. Well, I think we're into it here then. I guess where do you want to start, Chris?
Well, why don't we just create a Docker file? That's always a good starting point. So we'll use what we have a little bit from last time as well too.
So it's just in the base root directory, and it's just called Dockerfile.
Yeah, with a capital D usually.
Great.
With no extension. So you can, if you have a bunch of Docker files, sometimes people put them in a subfolder, but for now, for just the one, we can just put it in there. All right, and then, so I'm looking at what we used last time. Use Ruby 2.6.3, I think. So
yeah, that's right. In the gem file, it's defined Ruby 263, which is maybe just a 0.1 or 2 out of date now, but I think we should just roll with that.
Yeah, so the first thing you're gonna wanna do in a Docker file is you're gonna wanna list what boot image you want, right? If you're really hardcore, you could list just like Debian or Ubuntu or something like that, but there's already an existing Ruby image that sets up everything we need for Ruby. So you can just type it. So the first part's all in all capital letters is from. And then in this case, it'll be lowercase, it's just Ruby.
Yep.
And then colon, and then we're gonna put the version. So you could just leave it as Ruby, and what that would do is every time it would always pull the latest Ruby image that was up there. But sometimes you don't want that, because what'll happen is you'll be working on an old one, and then say someone else comes along 6 months from now, and I pull it down 6 months later, I'm gonna get a different Ruby Docker image. So usually you wanna specify the version or get a specific version of the image that you want. Yep.
So that makes sense. If you leave the dependencies just open-ended, then every person that uses the image would get like a slightly different install. And to me, the whole point is to keep everything exactly the same and reproducible.
Yeah, that's what we're aiming for, kind of, yeah. And then the second thing we might as well set up right now is a DockerCompose file. So if you remember from the talk we gave, or the talk I gave on Saturday, the DockerCompose file lets you manage multiple Docker containers at once.
Yeah.
Right on. Is that a separate file then?
Yeah, it's a separate file. And in this case, it's for some reason it's lowercase. I don't know why, but it's docker-compose.yaml.
Okay. Also just in the root directory, hey?
Yeah. Yeah, and then in that guy, for right now, so usually the very first line you have in there is the version of DockerCompose that you're, or the file version that you're running. Oh, and I don't know if you want to install that file type for there.
Oh, no, we're not going to do that today.
So you just, in this case, is lowercase, just version, colon, and then space, single quote, and then we'll just, I think the latest one is 3-7 still, so, or 3.7, sorry.
Great.
Yeah, and then I guess I can type some of this too. So
the live share magic.
This is live share coding. So right, and then so we'll set up just a simple services. So just so we're not typing forever here, I'll speed this along a little bit. So just something like that. So that's basically each service is like a Docker container that you have set up. So we're going to have one called web. That's usually the default I use, and that seems like a lot of other people use, but you can really call it anything you want, right?
Okay.
And then the first line there, that build dot, that just means find the Docker file that's in the same folder and build that Docker file.
Oh,
so
nice. Okay.
let's make sure we save everything. And then if you open up a terminal, let's see if this actually is working.
Let me try the terminal in VS Code here. I don't usually use this, but
Oh,
I'll
okay.
share.
Hey, that's cool.
I'm more swap out to iTerm or like a separate terminal program, but whatever. Okay, so sorry, what did you want me to, what command should I run here?
So you're just gonna do Docker compose, Docker-compose. Let's just do yeah, it's okay. So Docker-compose, and then you're gonna want to do build. And you can either type web, or if you just type build, it'll build everything in your Docker file. It's up to you.
Right on. Okay. I need to start Docker for Mac.
Welcome to live demoing, I guess.
Right.
And sorry, is Pranjali?
Yeah, Pranjali.
Yeah, feel free, if you haven't, since you're the only one joining us, feel free to ask any questions, or I don't know if you're more experienced with Docker or anything, feel free to point out any mistakes we're making.
I have used Docker before, but I wasn't the one who set it up. So this is more of like, how did the things that I use come to be kind of a session for me. So I'll join in if there's anything I want to add.
Sure, sounds good.
Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to actually start this this thing on Mac here.
There should be a giant, like a whale at the top of your bar, at the very top of your Mac.
Oh, there is too, yeah.
So if you go to that little whale, there might be something about there why it's not running.
Okay, sorry, it just says it's starting up here.
Yeah, and then once it starts up, it'll take a minute or two. The little whale, the things on top of the whale will move for a bit, and then when they're done moving, it should be good to go.
I think we are good here. We have whale power.
All right, that's looking better. So the first thing it's going to do, you probably don't have this image on your machine, so it's going to pull the image from Docker Hub down, and then it's going to cache it on your machine. So any future builds that you do that use the Ruby 2.6.3 will just use your cached image. So one of the downsides of Docker is if you use it for a bunch and you have a bunch of different clients or projects on your machine, you can start to take up quite a bit of room. So every once in a while, you have to go in there and purge the old images or old containers. So hopefully you have a nice big hard drive.
I use RVM, the Ruby version manager, quite a bit to juggle a whole bunch of different versions and sites. And it's the same kind of thing. You pull down so many different copies of these gems, and you just get like 10, 20 gigabytes of this hidden folders sooner or later.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, right. So we've Docker Compose built.
Yeah, so it's built it, and we might as well just run it. Just let's make sure everything does working. So if you just do Docker Compose, and then instead of build, just type run and then web. And sorry, you have to put bash at the end. Sorry. Okay. So by default, what the Ruby container does, if you don't enter a command like bash or something, it takes you right into the Ruby interpreter. So the default Ruby Docker file is set up to just run you into, what is that, IRB there. If you type bash, it puts you in a bash shell.
Okay, so we want to be in bash?
Yeah, sure. Let's just poke around. There. Okay. So now you're inside your Docker container, right? You can see it says root, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
Yeah. So, and if you ever needed to see like what's in your Docker container, where the file is located, bash is a very handy way. Like you'll use bash to get in there and just poke around.
Okay. Where's my app here then? Or we probably haven't got that set up yet.
No, we haven't gone that far yet. So you might, and to get out, you just type exit. And then last thing I'll show you too is if you do a Docker, and then space PS, it'll show you all your running containers. So right now we don't have any running, but if you had one running there, it would show up. So if you ever need to see what containers are running, and the nice thing is it'll tell you what ports they're looking at too, because sometimes every once in a while I have connection problems to the Docker container. It's usually because I don't have a port set up properly.
Sure. So Docker is like its own little like mini operating system in a way.
Man, I'm not qualified to answer. Yeah, I
Kind
treat
of.
it like, yeah, I guess in a way it kind of is. I've always treated it like as a container or like an encapsulation platform, so that it encapsulates, like it's going to encapsulate your effective website from the rest of your computer, right? So
Sure.
like we're going to install things like, I think your app required like Node.js, and then whatever version of Ruby and those gems are all going to be encapsulated inside that Docker container and be isolated from the rest of your system.
Very
So
cool.
whether it's its own mini OS, I know it does some creative stuff under the hood with the Linux operating system, so that it reuses. So it's not a full VM, but it reuses some of the underlying operating system stuff to isolate it.
Yeah.
And then on things like Windows, it'll use VirtualBox
Oh,
to
really?
help isolate itself. I think the newer versions might use Windows built-in hypervisor, but I haven't used Docker on Windows in quite a while, so I'm not quite sure how all that works right
Sure. It's been a long time since I developed on a Windows machine as well.
now. Yeah, I used to do a lot of .NET development, but not
Me
recently.
too.
So
Yeah, I was a C# guy for a number of years.
all right, so
Okay.
if you go back to the Docker file, we'll set up that app directory. So do you remember in the talk last week we set up the app directory?
Right.
So to do that, I don't know. Do you prefer typing, or should I just cut and paste in there? What would you prefer there, Matt?
I don't mind if you just cut and paste it. Let's just kind of go slow and we'll talk about each paste, but I don't think they really
Sure.
need to see me typing it all
All right, so this is, in our case, we're just going to set up a working directory. So the first command is just a run. So anytime, that's just going to run a command in your Docker container. So in this case, we're using a version of Ubuntu, I think, or Debian under the hood.
out. Okay.
So whatever command is there, it's just going to run it. The second one, working directory, later on in the Docker file, if we ever specify paths, that'll set our default path to the app directory. So all relative paths will be from the app directory.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So
Cool.
yeah, so that's just a common place to set it up. And in /app, something short. You can put it really wherever you want. Other people put it in different spots. One thing to watch for is things like GitLab and other CIs or other, mostly CIs I've ran into this, is they have their own folder where when you do a checkout, they'll put it into their own folder. So you just want to make sure you're using the same folder as them, or you'll run into all sorts of grief. So we have that there. So that's just going to set that up. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is, if we look, so because we're only setting this up for development environment, we don't need to do a bunch of copying of files inside the Docker file itself, because we want live editing of our code, right, when we're in development. If we were doing this in
Absolutely.
production, we would just copy the code into the Docker container, and that would be like immutable. You treat that as immutable, and then you push that whole Docker container to production.
I see.
So we're going to do all of our kind of copying of folders inside the DockerCompose here. And we'll do that using volumes. Can I switch? If I switch here. Oh, it doesn't bring up Docker. Yeah. Oh, okay. Did you switch that, or did it switch it for you?
I just switched now. I think it's just streaming
okay.
where I am, but you had moved over.
All right. So we'll set up these things called volumes. I guess we don't need that second one right off the bat here. So that first volume that we're going to set up, the way you read that is, sorry, I'm just watching me move it there. Oh, yeah, okay. So this first part here, this dot, that just means copy everything in the current folder that the Docker file's in, and all the subdirectories. And it does not really copy, it's like mapping it to, and then colon to /app inside the Docker container.
Oh, I
so
see.
now if we save, can I save it on mine?
I just did, yeah.
Okay. So that's saved. And so now if you rebuild this Docker container and then run it, Docker-compose, and then build web. Yeah. It should be a lot quicker. It doesn't have to pull the image down.
Yeah, good point.
Oh yeah, I can even see the terminal on mine. So, sorry to people watching, because this is my first time using VS Code Live.
It's amazing.
Now if you do Docker-compose run web. Run web bash, and then if you go look inside your app folder,
Actually,
bash, sorry, not dash.
I see.
Now, if you ls there, you should
Oh, yeah.
see, there's all your files.
So
And
yeah,
then if you,
sorry, this time when we bashed, we jumped into the app directory immediately.
yes.
And sure enough, it looks like it has probably everything from the volume in there.
Yeah, and if you edit a file or if you add a new file, it'll show up there in real time as well now. So in this case, you're now going to see it in your VS Code, but you could also do it in outside of your Docker container. You could also add a new file,
Oh, okay.
and it'll show up inside of it, right? Or any changes you make. So now if you ls in your Docker container, you should see that file.
Oh, of course. Cat from.
Yeah.
Sure enough, yeah, okay. So I can file from in my container, and everything's just kind of flowing through that that volume.
Yeah. So one thing to note with the Docker Compose with the volume mapping is if inside your container you already had an app folder, that app folder is going to get not overwritten, but it's going to get hidden, and the one that you map on top is going to take precedence over it. So the files that you have kind of that are buried underneath are still there. You just can't see them anymore. So it's something to keep in mind. Every once in a while, people think files disappeared, but it's usually because you've mapped a volume on top of it. And then when you map that volume, it takes all your host files and puts them on your Docker container, and all the other files underneath are hidden. And maybe a file you wanted has disappeared. All right, cool. So that's all working. So what's the next thing we should probably do? Well, let's keep going with Docker Compose here.
Okay. I would say we either set up our database next, or maybe environment variables.
Sure. Let's set up the database. Actually, do we need the? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Rails requires a database for so many things. So, I can't remember what database you use again. So.
Sure. Yeah. So I have the effective website kind of set up that people could jump into it easily. So by default, it's just on like SQLite. But it's a quick change here to just flip it onto Postgres.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Okay, so I'll copy this Postgres setting that I have. Okay.
So I just updated my Rails config database.yml with some PostgreSQL settings. And I bet that I might need to change the host and possibly add a password to get this actually working on Docker, though.
Yeah. So if you we'll go back to if you go back to your Docker Compose there, I've added some more stuff in there.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So I just picked Postgres 12. Again, you would set that to whatever database you want your clients to work with. So if you have a specific client and they're on Postgres 9, you set the Postgres 9 or whatever. The next thing down below is the volume. So basically we're saying map the actual data in the database to this volume. I have to put the volume part at the very bottom here in a second. But what that prevents, if you don't do that, what happens is all your data volume gets stored in the actual container itself. And then if you destroy that container, you've lost all your data. But if you create a volume, it creates a separate little, not really container, but a storage area that your container accesses. So if you get rid of your container, that little storage area still exists. So it's nice when you have to because oftentimes you're rebuilding containers or you're taking them down, you're bringing them back up, but you don't often destroy those volumes. So then you don't lose all your test data, seed data that you set up.
Yeah.
So ports command there. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that ports command just opens up that port on the Docker container and it maps it to your host. So that's the default port for Postgres. And then the last thing there is just the password.
So I'm just curious about this DB volume here. Do I also need Postgres running on my local machine to do that? Or
no, you don't.
Or is it just like a area on the disk that the Postgres from inside the Docker image would use? I guess I'm just curious about this database volume. Like a database orders all its information and data quite a bit in its own kind of like server format or whatever in the database format. So I was just curious that you could either like keep the data inside the Docker image and run with its database, but then have the data it's connecting to stored on your local machine. And it's just kind of
Oh,
cool.
yeah, you can. Yeah. In this case, we're mapping to this. If you see down below, we have this DB volume. So we're mapping to a Docker volume. If you wanted to, you could map to a path on your host machine. But that gets a little trickier. Especially for development environments, it's nicer to map to this DB volume. And then again, it's easier to destroy those DB volumes, back them up. You can share them between, you can make them external and share them between containers if you need to.
Cool.
This is the easiest way to do it. So if you wanted to map it to something on your host, instead of typing DB volume and then having the volumes kind of tagged down at the bottom there, you would just type a path on your host and it would map all that to your host. And then the other problem, to make this really portable too, it's nice to use the Docker volumes, because if my paths are different than your paths, or I'm trying to run this on a different machine or like Windows or something like that, you'll run into problems, right? Because like if you store yours in /temp something, that path might not exist on my machine. And one thing when we're trying to create good development environments is to keep it portable, and so it can run on anyone's machine with minimal configuration. So
very cool.
All right, so let's, as usual, let's save that and let's try and build that and see if it actually works.
Okay.
So I guess the one other thing to note is that in this case, we don't have that build command. In this case, we have an image. So we're saying we don't want anything installed. Like we're not going to have a Docker file for our database. We're just going to use the default Postgres image that we pull off Docker Hub. We're not going to customize it in any way, aside from specifying like ports and stuff like that.
Okay.
Sorry. The other thing we'll have to do is update your database.yaml file there too.
Yeah.
So in this case, the host is the name of that we called that. So in this case, we just called it DB.
Okay. I think we probably have to add that password too.
Yeah, and you'll have to have the username is should be, I think the username is Postgres is the default username.
Is it username or just user?
Oh man, you're like the Ruby guy. I think it's username. I'd have to take a quick look.
Let's try this.
I think it's user.
Oh.
But I'm not sure. I feel like it's just user for Postgres.
Okay.
Okay, so let's try building that, and then we can try running it. Oh, excuse me.
And then,
now, when you go to run it, so this time it didn't actually pull that database image. When you go to run it the first time, it will. So if you do that DockerCompose run web bash, or just the other thing you can do. Okay, let's just run web. Yeah. Oh, you'll have to.
should I bash it? Sorry. Let's do that bash again.
Oh, I think we forgot. Sorry, we did forget one thing there. There was a reason it didn't build that.
Also, it is actually username. I take my comment back. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Who can remember these things?
All right, and then if you go back to the Docker Compose, there's one line I forgot to add in there.
Yep.
So you got that depends on. So now we're saying that web depends on the DB container. So, in this case, it'll always try to build or pull down the DB image before it sets up the web one. So now if you go Docker Compose run web bash, it'll pull down the Postgres image for us.
Maybe we have to.
You must have already had that there from another. You must have had that image on your machine already from maybe last week or something.
That could be, yeah. I have a lot of stuff in here.
So now we don't have any of the gems installed or anything.
I guess not. Don't we have to do a bundle here?
Yeah, it's actually easier if we. Yeah, well, we'll do it now, and but then we'll set it up so that Docker will do it for us eventually. So.
Okay. It's always amazing to me that like what I feel is a basic website or whatever just depends on like 90 different gems and libraries. And it's just,
yeah,
we're lucky to live here in 2020 where we code, on the shoulder of giants.
Yeah.
Yeah, really glad we don't have to make everything from scratch every time we do anything.
Yeah. But yeah, okay. So I think bundling this will probably take a few more moments here as it does whatever it's doing.
Yeah, you have a lot of those effective gems too, so I think those took a couple minutes last time.
Sure. So my gem file here is not even that crazy. It's standard kind of Ruby stuff. I do use Bootstrap on the front end. Can for my not authentication, but permissions and all that. Devise, of course. Devise is kind of a love-or-hate in the Ruby world, but I mostly love it.
And Devise is all about usernames and passwords too, right?
That's correct, yeah. And I like Devise because it gives you like the username and passwords and all that kind of good stuff. But a lot of like the OAuth plugins are really nice. And there's just writable plugins and stuff that work with it. So I would probably be okay making my own like sign in, sign out kind of process. But I definitely wouldn't want to code all those like Google and Facebook sign in through kind of things. It'd suck. So then I have all my effective gems or whatever. It's just kind of the secret sauce of code and effect that we bring from project to project and lets me just write once and use anywhere. And then a little bit of development only and testing only gems. And a little bit for the production and staging as well. Try to keep everything, as same as possible. The only difference is in production, I maybe use this sidekick gem, which is your kind of background jobs. And then on development, I'm not even sure what I'm using, just the built-in Rails like inline one. It's not actually a background processor, but it works for development.
Yeah, I remember, I think last year you gave a presentation at the Ruby meetup about some of your effective gems.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it helps you spin up websites and a lot quicker, right? Because a lot of I think you had like an admin section where you could add new users real quickly. You kind of had like the boilerplate for a lot of standard websites ready to go, right?
Yeah, that's exactly the idea. Build the boilerplate and then we don't have to do it again.
And then do you have lots of clients that you have to support long term? Or you just write a website and kind of, do they take over after that?
Unfortunately, I do support them long term, yes.
Oh, okay, cool.
I don't know, I'm trying to think now. One of our oldest clients is, we've had for maybe about 11 or 12 years now. So we built them probably a Rails 2.3 app in the very beginning and upgraded them to like Rails 3 and 4 and 5. And they should probably sign that proposal and that way we could upgrade them to Rails 6. But that's honestly a frustration for me is because we have a lot of legacy maintaining apps. And, as a developer, you want to, constantly do updates, keep everything bleeding edge and everything. But who's going to pay for all that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like it has bundled successfully here.
Yeah, so now you can try and create a database or connect to it or something, and it should work in there. Well, let's see if it works. Maybe we screwed something up. So this is always the live demo part. Oh, this is probably complaining about Node.js.
Yes, it is.
All right, so let's go back and fix that. So if you exit out of your Docker.
This is one of those dependencies I didn't actually know I had. So it typed is through the boot snap, and then boot snap calls exec.js behind the scenes. So that's kind of interesting. Boot snap is recommended. I think it was actually created by Shopify, but it makes your app boot up faster, I guess.
Oh, okay.
So I guess how would we approach installing the Node.js?
So we'll have to go back to the Dockerfile.
Okay.
All right, so this is the part where install third-party dependencies.
Very cool.
Now everyone knows I can. Did I spell dependency right? All right, I'll assume yes.
Looks good to me.
Right, so usually in most Docker files, you see something like this, right? You'll see something that installs all the dependencies that they need. And because we're running, oops, we can't use APT. Oh yeah, we can, sorry. Because we're using Ubuntu, we just use Ubuntu's or Debian's package manager. I think I talked about last time at the meetup too, that some people use Alpine images, which are smaller Docker images. But then you use a different, use APK as your package manager instead. So.
Oh, cool.
Right, so this basically
build or something instead of run then?
Yeah, so we'll have to rebuild it. So if we make a change, make sure you save that Docker file.
All right. So I think another way we could do this is instead of installing Node.js on the Docker image, we could use like a Ruby gem, like the Ruby Racer, that would have its own kind of JavaScript runtime built in.
Yeah, yeah, you can do that as well.
Just fine.
Yeah, so it'll look like it installed there. Now, one of the things you're going to notice is all your bundles are gone. So just try this, and it should give you black. Because what happened is we rebuilt the container. So the container doesn't have all those, the bundle images or all the gems in there anymore. Yeah. So eventually we'll add those to a, well, that bundle took a while. Why don't we do that now? What we'll do is we'll add those bundles to a separate volume.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So we don't have to worry about that every time. All right, so wrong one. All right, so if you go to the DockerCompose, we have this line here. So it depends, if you want to save your bundles in separate folders or whatever, you can just map that however. But again, we're mapping this to a Docker volume. Okay. And then this is where the bundles end up by default, unless we specify somewhere else. So those will go there. Now we can play with fire a little bit, because this was something that was recommended to me by some coworkers. So what I used to do in the past is I would actually have in the Docker file, I'd have run bundle install, and it would install all the gems there. But then someone else suggested it was nicer if you could do it inside of a Docker entry point, and that entry point would check if the bundle install had been run. If it hadn't, then install everything. So I don't know. Do we dare try that?
Yeah, let's give it a shot.
All right. So
I've never used a Docker entry point before, so this is new territory now.
All right. So the first thing we're going to do in our Docker file is we're going to have an actual Docker file itself there.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So now we added this Docker entry point in there. So we have to have so one thing we have to do is we have to copy that Docker entry point, make sure it exists inside of our, I don't know if we need to do that with Compose or not, but anyway, we'll just put it in there. We can test that out later. Right. Then we need to make sure that that Docker entry point is executable. It tries to copy the permissions for Docker entry point on your machine. So you should make that executable on your machine too, just to make sure.
Okay. So this is inside my Rails app directory, is that right?
Yep. No, not inside app. Remember that this app that this app here is inside our Docker container. So what we're saying here is this Docker entry point. We're copying Docker entry point on your host, that file, onto the Docker container inside the /app folder, because that's our working directory inside the Docker container. Okay. And then we're going to change the permissions on to make sure it's executable. And then this entry point is just this path specified inside your container so that it can find it. So that path has to be a path inside your container.
Cool, cool, cool. So then
most people just put it right in the root. Yeah. All right.
All right. I think
Now,
you
can I
should be able to
see,
jump in there.
where's your Docker entry point? There we are. All right. So yeah, basically this if bundle check is kind of a new thing for me. So we'll see if this actually, I tried it a little bit, just a couple minutes before this meeting. It seemed to work. So we'll see if it actually works. The other things are quite common in a Docker entry point for a Rails app, removing the lock file.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see that quite often. Otherwise, sometimes you'll start your container. It's like, oh, the container's already running. You'll get that error message because that PID file, because you killed your container ungracefully, like you control-C'd it or something like that.
Makes sense.
So that just gets rid of that problem. And that last thing you'd see there, that exec, what that says is that run any arguments that were passed into this entry point file. So eventually what we're going to do is we're going to pass in a command through our DockerCompose. That'll be like Rails S with the port number. And so that'll be the command it'll execute, but really it'll execute any command that you want. So
very cool. Okay. Okay, so I'm Docker composing again. I'm kind of hung up on the run versus build, I guess. Am I building? Or
yeah, we'll need to build it again because we added all those entries. Anytime you change the Docker file, even the I think even when you change the compose file, it's probably best to rebuild it. I'm not quite. It's a habit I gotten into. I'm not quite sure if it matters all the time, but
it doesn't hurt.
Found all the entry points. Yeah, and now let's try running that guy. Oh, we got an error in there. What do I? It must be a typo or something.
Looks like it's on line 6.
So this is where my Linux stuff. Oh, but it's installing bundle, so that's good.
Okay.
What was that error message that it spit up there? Can you scroll up in your?
Sure. I think it's the semicolon after the bundle check, but I'm not for sure.
Bundle unexpected operator. Oh.
I think it's maybe
is
this
anyone
right here.
Is anyone a Linux expert? Do they know which one to get rid of?
I've written a lot of bash scripts in my day, but I always have to just refer to it. Yeah.
To look it up. So theoretically, if we ran this again, it wouldn't do bundle install. It would already have checked and it's like, oh, everything's there.
Okay. It's cruising here anyway.
And then because if we, in that Docker Compose, we set this up to store everything in a volume, theoretically, everything should be stored in that volume. So we'll find out if that actually works. Worst case, we go back to the old way I did it, where I would install everything in the Dockerfile, the bundle installer. So
okay, that'd make more sense if you're like pushing production or whatever. But
yeah, when you're pushing production, you'll see people will copy the gem file in there. They'll bundle install everything. They'll copy any like node, like yarn locks or anything. They'll bundle, then they'll install all those, and then they'll copy all their source code in. There's reasons you don't copy your whole entire app into the Docker file right at the very beginning. It just has to do with the way Dockerfile layers work. And then when you make a change to a Docker file, Dockerfile, what it does is it sees if you change that line. If that line didn't change, it just uses the cached version of it. That's why it builds it. The second time you build it, it builds real quick.
Okay.
But if you change one of those lines, all the other lines underneath it become invalidated. So people try to break it up so that if they do have to change something, it's not going to invalidate their whole file and rebuild everything from scratch.
No, that makes sense. It's cool. It can just store it in this volume and all that.
Well, this is waiting. Maybe I'll take a quick look about how. Yeah. Did you check? Is that the semicolon?
That's the problem, yeah. I'm not sure if we need this semicolon after there either.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a bash script expert, unfortunately. So this is where I think this is where we need what's his name from the Ruby meetup? Andy. He would probably. And he seems like, you know, he's got the gray beard and the gray hair. Like he seems like the guy you would go to with a obscure Linux question.
Right.
So sorry to stereotype you there, Andy.
I don't know. There's probably more bash scripts and shell scripts and just like that kind of code that runs the world than we'd like to admit.
Yep. It takes a while. So what I'll do too is I will put the last thing we'll need in that DockerCompose file for us to actually see the application.
Yeah, great.
And that's the ports. I guess we don't need the, you don't use RubyMine, so.
No. I've used RubyMine in the past. It's been a few years. I should switch back and try it again. I've been on VS Code for just about maybe 6 or 7 months now. Before that, I was on Sublime Text for the longest time. I don't know. I might go back to Sublime.
Oh, okay.
It's a IDE made by developers for developers, but unfortunately, it was also designed by developers. So.
The best and worst of both worlds, I guess. Yeah. All right. Well, so that part looked like it worked.
Okay. So I feel like I want to maybe try to create my database here.
Yeah. Let's see if that works. We should be mapped to our database. Theoretically, once we exit this and rebuild our Docker container, all of our bundles, gems should be bundled. So we shouldn't have to do that yet.
Very cool.
The other thing you can do too, do you have a third party, do you have some sort of database ID installed on your host machine?
I definitely have Postgres, like Postgres app, just version 11 on my Mac here. So yeah, I do have a Postgres.
Sure, because if you want to, you could bring up that IDE, or even from the command line if you're comfortable with that. You from your host machine, you'll be able to connect to port 5.3, whatever that port was. Is Postgres using again? 5432, and then you can just see right in the database. So I find that's really handy too when I'm working with applications, right, in development. I want to see the tables. I want to see what data's in there. So.
Okay. Do you know the PSQL command to connect? I'm not sure.
No, that's why I was asking if you have a third. I use JetBrains Data Grip.
Sure.
I'm not a very big command line guy because I can never remember all the commands. So that's okay.
Okay, let's do that another time. Yeah.
All right.
I believe we have created the database, migrated and seeded inside of our image there.
Yep.
Try that again, or?
So if you look at the DockerCompose, just a couple things I added there. The two last things I added was the ports. So there's that port 3000.
Right.
So similar to how the database container port mapping works, same thing here, just saying for the web container, map port 3000 on the container to port 3000 on your host machine. So you can go localhost 3000 and it'll connect you to this container. Cool. You can obviously change those ports around if you want to use port 3000 internally and you want to use an external port of a different one, just change it however you want. And that the other one up there is that command line. And that's just so if you remember that Docker entry point, that is the command that will get executed at the very end of that Docker entry point, is that command at the very top there. And so you can change that to whatever Rails command you want to run, but this one basically will start the Rails server. So let's build that again.
Rails server port 3000 and bind to the external IP.
Yeah, so 0000 just says bind to everything. For Docker and development, you want to do that. If you try to bind to like 127.0.0 or something, you could have connection issues. So.
Okay.
All right, so let's do a quick test. Let's just do Docker. You've run the migrations. Do you need to run your seed or anything?
I just did. Yeah, I already did.
Okay, well, let's try the run web bash and we'll just see if that works. I'm curious to see if it'll try and install the gems again, if I got that right.
Okay.
Oh, no, we need some semicolons or something there.
We do, don't we?
I think there needs to be a space after that. Oh, no, there we go. If you scroll up, I'm just curious if I got this right or not. Did it complain about anything?
Yeah,
Bundle, unexpected operator.
We don't know how to bash, but that's okay. We know how to. I think
okay. All right. So if we exit out of this.
Okay.
Now let's just see if it runs. So if you go DockerCompose up and then web.
Okay.
So in this case, it's not going to run bash. It's going to run the command at the end of your Docker entry point. So you should see it starting the server at the end there. We got everything correct.
Yeah.
So that's all looking good.
This is
Now, if you open up a web browser on your host machine, like Firefox or Chrome or something like that, and then you go
Firefox.
localhost 3000, let's see if this actually works. We ran into trouble with this last time, so.
Oh yeah.
Can you bring your
I'm
into the
just gonna
screen?
say
So
how I can share my my Firefox here as well.
if you drag it onto this screen, it'll just show up. Yeah, but I can see in the log there. That's cool. Yeah.
Is it showing up? I just dragged it to my main desktop. I feel like maybe you're just seeing the VS Code window.
Oh, there we go.
That changed us. So I still have my VS Code going on. I can see that it did make a web request, and here in Firefox it's just spinning up. So the very first time you start a Rails app, it's got to compile all its assets. It's got to generate JavaScripts and CSS files, and Rails isn't exactly known for starting up quickly, but after the first boot, it should be a little bit better. I can hear my Mac just taking off. The fans are spinning up. It's probably maxing out all.
Well, yeah, you do have Zoom running.
Or whatever.
Yeah, your Zoom. We're doing the live code sharing. Your Mac's probably under a lot of load right now.
That's right.
You have Docker running, so yeah, you're testing the limits of it.
Yeah.
It looks like it's working, so that's good.
I think so. Come on. It's usually not this slow, but come on. Oh, it's transferring. Hey, there we go.
Oh, that was good. Cool. Yeah, so there you go. Now this is running inside the Docker container. So now if you go edit a file or something, you should see that like your home page. I don't know, put Matt rules or something in there.
Where the heck would I have put that? Pages home.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, now you're running completely inside of your Docker container there. So
wow, I'm living in the future. Very cool.
Yeah, and then the idea would be you would commit those 3 files that we worked on.
Okay.
The Dockerfile, the DockerCompose, and the Docker entry.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously we're about to fix up that Docker entry. I got to figure out what that semicolon stuff is going on there. But then someone like me, and then you would have instructions on your, say, README for the effective website in GitHub. You would say, here's how you run my website, like in development mode, here's how you run it. You do DockerCompose build, and then you can do DockerCompose up or whatever, and you should see the website.
Very, very cool.
Oh, it's a really nice editing form you got there. Right on.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we had created the base Docker file and the Docker Compose, which is more like the configuration for the Docker. And then we created this Docker entry point.sh as well to just run commands and do whatever we need when the Docker container first starts.
Yeah, yeah. So the one thing, like I said before, that I haven't put in a Docker entry point before that I'm just trying is usually I do the bundle install inside the Docker file itself. So you'll see a run line with there that'll run bundle install everything. Yeah. But all the other Docker entry point items in there is quite common for most Rails apps.
Yeah, this
especially I said, removing that lock file. If you don't remove that lock file, it's just so annoying because then you have to go into the Docker container, remove it manually. So you put that in your Docker entry point all the time. So
Very cool. Very cool. It's neat to me that you can, I guess, connect with my VS Code, which lives on my machine, right into the image. I imagine you could probably hook it up for multiple people to do that at the same time, like multiple people working on the same container.
I don't know if VS Code how many connections it would support. I've never. This is the first time I've tried it, so it works really well.
Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything else you wanted to really cover here?
No, hey, that worked out good. It's almost 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
It's almost like we had this. We did a dry run, but we didn't. We just winged it.
Very cool. Okay, well, I'm going to take these files and I'm going to absolutely commit them, and I'll write up just a small how to spin up the Docker image. So the next Ruby developer that stumbles across the effective website on GitHub there and has Docker going, they'll be able to install it even quicker.
Yeah. They don't have to worry, like I said, Node.js or anything like that. It'll make debugging easier. Like if I'm trying to install it and I have a different version of Node.js, and I'm like, Matt, my effective website's not working, and yeah, it just solves all those problems.
Very cool. Thanks so much, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you, Matt, for letting me finish that demo off. That's awesome.
Cool. All right. I'll see you around. Catch you.
Yeah, have a good one.